Hey, what's up guys, my name is Cherno. Welcome back to my game engine series. So last time we separated our project out into Hazel Editor. Check out that video if you haven't already. And it seems that everyone likes the name Hazelnut, which is nice because so do I. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, we have made a new project called Hazel Editor, which is going to be the level editor for Hazel. And the name that it has inside the development branch of Hazel is Hazelnut. That's just what I've called it. I don't know why, it just randomly happened. But people seem to like it, so I guess we'll make it Hazelnut. If anyone objects to this, write a comment, but I think that that's pretty much solved. But that is not all we're going to do today, don't worry. What we're going to do today is we're going to continue on our IMGUI viewport journey. This is really the viewport journey, and specifically the part that we're up to is making it so that we, instead of just assuming some kind of resolution, which is 1280 by 720 in this case, we need to actually bring the viewport, which is a frame buffer, out into its own IMGUI panel, and then based on the size of that panel, set our frame buffer size so that we can render our scene appropriately. And that is what we're going to be doing today. So let me just switch into this mode. And we can take a look at that. So it's not a particularly difficult job. If I launch Hazel Editor at the moment, actually, let's rename it to Hazelnut as our first order of business, because I will just forget to do that eventually, and that'll be a bad thing. So Hazel Editor, which I think is, we did a Hazel Dash Editor. Okay, so we're just gonna rename this to Hazelnut. Location will be Hazelnut. And that, I think, is it. So if I go back here, all we really need to do is rename this to Hazelnut now, the folder, and then rerun the script. And I think that should work. Let's reload Visual Studio, and everything should be as before. Oh, and one more thing we forgot to do there was actually set our startup project, I think. That was already open. So start project to sandbox. So let's maybe change the start project to be Hazelnut, because I think we'll get it working at the end of this. That'll just change it from sandbox to Hazelnut as a default start project if you don't have like a Visual Studio settings file that already does that. So, and then Hazel Editor app we'll rename to Hazelnut app, and then Hazelnut. That didn't really work. Hazelnut is our application, and Hazelnut. Okay, so a little bit of refactoring, but we've got Hazelnut. Hazelnut is now live. Now we just need some kind of nut logo, probably a hazelnut logo, maybe a walnut logo for Hazelnut would be a funny thing to do. I am full of humor, as you can see. Okay, so we've got this viewport. As you can see, we're just setting it to 1280 by 720. If we look at our editor layer, that is in fact what it's set to over here or here, because I always get these two branches kind of mixed up. But what we want to do instead is actually, first of all, create a new viewport. So let's do that. This is the dock space, and I think this is our settings window. This is the beginning of our settings window, then we do our stats, and then this is the end. So we don't want to do this in the settings window. We actually want to make a new window. I'm going to begin, and this is going to be called viewport. This is our viewport window. And then we'll do IMGUI end. So there's a way to see how big this is, and there's a function called IMGUI get viewport get content region available, I guess, which is going to give us, I think, a vec2, yep, an IMVec2, which is going to be the size of our viewport. So viewport panel size, we'll say. Now there is some kind of padding and other things that we'll have to deal with in a minute, but that's the gist of it. So if I call printf here, I don't know why I'm doing that, because we've clearly got like hz warn. So viewport size 0, 1, and if I chuck in viewport panel size.x, viewport panel size.y, if I just run that really quickly, then we should see that hopefully that's what we're after. And okay, so first of all, you'll notice the viewport is a separate panel, which is cool. We can dock it anywhere we want. Here, this is the settings panel. I'll move it there. Now this, as you can see, is kind of working already, but it's not really. It's just still rendering that huge image. And you can see there is a little bit of padding if you look like in the top left corner. But anyway, clearly if we resize this, it doesn't really care. Weird things happen if we move it down like this. There's just a lot of problems with it. But hopefully, I've moved it a bit. This viewport size should now kind of be dynamic, I guess, and I can't minimize the main window, of course. But if I look at the viewport size and I change it, you can see that this size changes. So this is what we're after. These values are what is going to feed into our frame buffer. So if that size changes, we want to recreate the frame buffer with a new size, which is fairly easy to do. So to do that, we're going to store the viewport size. So we'll say, and we can just store this. How should we store this? We'll just store this as a vec2 probably. I mean, we might as well store it as an imvec2, I guess. These are floats anyway, I believe. So there's no real difference. I guess just for consistency, we'll store this as a vec2. So we'll do m viewport size, and we'll just say viewport size equals viewport panel size dot x and viewport panel size dot y. So the idea is that if viewport size, and I guess I'll do glm vec2 viewport size. And I mean, you could type pun this because they do have the same memory layout. So in other words, and I guess, I don't know if we should do that. Usually people don't like it when I do dangerous stuff. But what we can do here is we can simply say if viewport size does not equal, and then we can do a little glm vec2 viewport panel size like that, right? So what this is going to do, and we might need more of these things. So we need an asterisk here, and this and that. So basically what that's doing is it's assuming the viewport panel size is actually this type because we're casting the memory address of it to a vec2 pointer and then dereferencing it as a vec2. So they're both vec2s now, viewport size and this. We'll probably rewrite this code in a minute because it is a little bit dangerous, but it should be fairly safe because the memory layout is the same. If you look at an IM vec2, it's two floats, x and y, and that's obviously what a glm vec2 is as well. So there's no reason to kind of construct a whole new object and copy all that data if you're just dealing with the same kind of memory layout. However, it is two floats, and it's not the end of the world if you do copy it, and it will probably be nicer to read. So we'll change it in a minute. But let's not get too hung up on this. So if it is different, first of all, we should probably assign it. I mean, we can do that anyway. But if it is different, we'll assign it, and then we'll also need to recreate the frame buffer. So we'll have to do m frame buffer, and then we can do probably maybe like, well, we can do two things, right? We can always do the invalidate function, but I think I'll just do resize. So I'll give it a new size. I'll resize it, and I'll say that we want to resize it to the viewport panel size. This is another reason why it would have been better to do it, you know, to have it as a glm vec2. But anyway, so that's going to recreate the whole frame buffer. So we need to add that API in, of course. So unbind is fine, but we'll also add a resize. And I guess we'll take in a size here, although it's probably good to have two, like, you know, integers as well, because that's typically how you'd want to create these things. I don't know if a vec2 like this is going to be necessarily a good API to have. In fact, if we look at what OpenGL frame buffer actually wants, it wants a GL size I, which I think, I mean, how are we storing them here? As uint32ts. I mean, to me, it makes no sense to have an API like this, just cast your variables or whatever. So I will actually separate them. So we'll have uint32 width and height like this. And we will grab this, we'll set it equal to 0. We'll grab this and with the virtual, and we'll go to OpenGL frame buffer. We will pop that in with the override keyword. We'll implement that function. One thing I forgot to do, I think, because I saw a comment or something, is I'm not actually deleting the textures, which is a big mistake. You know, we want to do gl delete textures. And then we'll delete them separately. We'll delete the color attachment and then also the depth attachment. So that was a bit of a mistake there. Because we're creating textures, we should delete them. Okay, so that's done. Now, resize. So what does resize do? Well, resize at this point basically does this, right? So it basically will recreate the frame buffer and it'll do everything. Now, I'm not sure if we necessarily should be deleting, I guess we should be deleting the whole frame buffer. It might be better to just detach. I don't know if you can detach textures. I want to quickly see what Hazel dev is doing, but I think that it is just deleting everything. So let's do that. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it into resize, but there's going to be an interesting block of code here because it's going to actually, and in fact, I don't know if we necessarily need to do this. Let's just maybe extend invalidate to do it. So this will have an if statement that basically checks to see if render ID is set. So if render ID is set, right, because if you look at this, we're going to initialize it to 0 like we'll do for everything else. So this is, you know, when we create a new frame buffer, if it doesn't exist or for whatever reason, it will be set to 0. But then if it's, so in other words, the first time we construct this and we call invalidate, and render ID is of course 0 because this is where we created. But if it has been set, so if it's not 0, we want to delete everything. That way now we've cleaned everything and we want to make a new frame buffer because that's how you resize them. So we'll get rid of this, I guess. So we'll recreate the whole frame buffer, and that's what invalidate will do. So really in resize, all we need to do then is we need to actually update the specification by setting the width and height to the new width and height, and then just invalidate it. And then that should be it. So I'll call invalidate. I think that's it. So if we go back into editor layer, which surprisingly I don't have pinned, then when we call resize, we can do resize viewport size X, viewport size Y, which we can just, we'll do it the way that I was originally doing it, but we'll also need to make sure that we cast it to a uint32t, because they should be integers, and I think we're good. That was fairly easy to do. And then we're, of course, so we're recreating the frame buffer on this line, and then we're getting the color attachment and rendering of it. Now, if this was done on a different thread, like the whole, like if OpenGL was done on a different thread, I think that this would be slightly, potentially slightly incorrect because, I mean, not necessarily, it's just, it's not going to synchronize between resizing the viewport and then getting the new frame buffer. So we might get a frame or so of the old frame buffer rendering, but this is a blocking call at the moment, which I think will resize the frame buffer. And then that way, because the color attachment render ID changes, that's the whole point. That's why I'm saying all of this, because the render ID will probably be different. So since it's going to, because we're deleting the old one and making a new one. So that's just a little bit of an important piece of information there. But I think everything else is good. The last piece of the puzzle is making sure that this, of course, is correct. So this is our width and height. So this now has to be mViewportSize.x and mViewportSize.y. Okay, so this is a bit of a mess now because we're casting types and doing all this stuff, but I think it might work. So let's hit F5 and see what happens. I still don't have a shirt that says that. Need to get on that. Okay, cool. So there's our viewport, and if I resize it, you can see that this whole thing will change, right? So I can break it off here if I want to. I can grab this, I can resize it to any size I want, almost any size I want. That for some reason is not being set correctly. Did I do something silly here? I'm just making sure I don't have X twice or something like that. No, that looks fairly okay. We might need to set the OpenGL viewport. I mean, height seems to be working. It is stretching it, as you can see. There's a lot of reasons for that. But in general, it should be, in fact, taking the size. Let's dock this maybe. It should be taking the size of, well, of whatever we have here. And scrolling doesn't work because ImGui is eating the events. But there you go, right? So we have a resizable viewport. Now, let's get rid of this padding. Now, to get rid of this padding, there's something called, well, it's just, I think it's just the window padding. So what we can do is before we begin this viewport window, we can actually set a style, push style var. So push a style variable, and this is the window ImGui style var. I'm just looking at Hazel Dev. Window padding, and if we set that to 0 here, and then we pop it after we're done with this window so that all the other windows don't have a padding of 0, then I think that should make it full screen, because that's what I ended up doing for Hazel Dev. Yeah, and there you can see now that we don't have a border around it, it's now the correct size. Now we also generally want to change the viewport. What I end up doing is inside the frame buffer bind call, I set the viewport. Because the frame buffer, if we're rendering to a frame buffer, we probably want the viewport to be the size of the frame buffer. So once I bind it, I just do gl viewport 0, 0, mspecification.width, mspecification.height. And that might fix our little issue of it not rendering full screen. And then also we need to set the projection. Yeah, it did fix. I can tell that it's linked because it's different. So you can see now we can really make it any size and it's going to fill up the whole frame here, or at least it should. Yeah, that's actually part of it as well. That kind of gray border, that's our clear color. So it is in fact filling everything. And then if I resize it to any size, it should, I'm moving like Visual Studio panels here, but it should be pretty much perfect. So what I need to do is, let's fix the camera. That's not the biggest issue. What we need to do at this point is basically, how are we even doing the camera? Where is my camera? Camera controller update. I don't know if necessarily the on event should be how we do this. We could probably just do it here. So what we'll do is we'll call mCameraController dot, we'll say set camera, orthographic camera. I guess we can just do set projection, can't we? Because the way that the camera changes, especially for an orthographic camera, is going to be completely up to the camera itself. So it's a little bit difficult to do this because it's, you know, it's kind of camera specific. But because we're very closely linked with an orthographic camera here, we can just do camera controller like get camera dot set projection. Left, right, bottom, top. So what do we initialize the camera to? It's, well, we just do camera controller. Do we really not have any code that deals with resizing? I feel like this has been a thing that, oh, window resize event does it. And it sets it to aspect ratio times zoom level. Well, that's all we need. So really, this is kind of what we need. What I'll do is I will add a function here called maybe resize bounds, and resize bounds is going to take in, needs floats, float width, float height. Should I call it on resize? Maybe just resize, I don't know. On kind of to me in a way implies that it's an engine level event, although not necessarily. Let's just do on resize, whatever. We'll call it that. I don't want to get hung up on this. So what I'll do is, you know, we know that, oh, should we, yeah, I guess we can just do width and height. So the way that we'll do this is we'll set aspect ratio equal to width divided by height over here. And then everything else is done. So if we do on resize with width and height like that, that's what happens when we zoom in and out. Or sorry, that's what happens when we resize the window. That's all we need to do. Just call the on resize function here and that should work. And we don't do this division. We just put in the width and the height. And then over here inside, where are we? Then all we need to do here is do camera controller on resize and then the width and height. So that's going to be our, well, basically just this. So now we should hopefully be resizing our camera every time the window resizes. And remember, the first frame, this will be different because, well, I don't think we're even initializing this. So maybe we should just make that 0, 0 or something like that. But it doesn't really matter. It's going to be different than the actual viewport panel size, which is what this is. And because it's going to be different, we're going to trigger this code here once until we resize again. And that's going to basically set up our frame buffer to the correct size, set up our viewport to the right size, which is basically going to set the camera. So that's that. So now everything should be the correct aspect ratio. If I resize the window or whatever, you can see hopefully that everything is correct. If I end up doing this, it zooms in a lot. because that's just how our camera works. And I can drag this around to any size, really. I can break off the viewport here and I can, you know, resize it, as you can see, to any size. And the camera stays pretty much, well, it stays the right aspect ratio, which is what I was looking for there. That's it. That is our fairly flawless viewport implementation now. So now we can see we have settings here and it's a dock panel. I don't like this whole flashing situation. I'm not 100% sure why that's happening. It might be something to do with the fact that we're rendering with either an invalid texture ID or something for a single frame, which is actually happening over here. What is this stupid branch situation? Docking enabled, true. Docking's always going to be enabled for this. Let's get rid of this. This is back when we had this in the sandbox project and I didn't want to destroy the sandbox project, but this is now its own project and everything's fine. Okay, so now we've gotten rid of that stupid area. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that maybe it has something to do with this because we shouldn't really have a frame of black like we do there. I think that's because we're probably giving it an incorrect texture ID or something like that. Because maybe it hasn't finished resizing. I'm not 100% sure because obviously it should be done, I think, by the time we do this. Anyway, if you guys know the solution to that, then definitely open up a pull request or something like that. And the first person who does so will get a prize, which will be like, I don't know, I'll probably just thank you for it publicly. So hopefully that's nice. Hopefully that's a good enough prize. Anyway, that's it. So now we have a viewport. Exciting stuff. Events. How long has this video been gone for? It's like 20 minutes. Okay, let's quickly see if we can fix the events. So I am GUI layer at the moment, I think, does some blocking code in certain situations. So if it wants to capture the mouse or the keyboard, it blocks stuff. I did not add this code, which is why it's here, which is why nothing's working. This is like a pull request. So thank you, community. This is not supposed to be here. And if we don't do this, I mean, you need this to some degree, but just not in this way. Now you can see everything works perfectly. It also means that if I scroll here, it also works. And that's kind of the place where it's not good. Because we don't want to receive events everywhere. We only want to receive the events basically if the mouse is being hovered on the viewport. And that's also important because if we try and access this and we type in W, I'm typing in W, but I mean, I can't because it's like a number field, but I'm typing S and W and it's moving my viewport. That's not what we want either. But this is just a way to kind of quickly get events working. So I will leave this code as is, but just know that this is not the solution and we'll be doing something slightly different in the future. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. Next time, I don't even know what we're going to do next time because we basically got the viewport working and we've got frame buffers now. I don't know. I'll probably think of that when we begin the next video. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. Please use the comment section below to express your thoughts and feelings about everything and anything and what you would like to see next, I guess, and maybe I'll work on that. I know we have a list somewhere on Trello, so I'll open that up next time and we will talk about that. Don't forget that you can help support the series by going to patreon.com/Cherno and you'll get access to like the Hazel Dev live streams and the source code to the more advanced kind of private version of Hazel, and you'll be ensuring that I can continue working on this series. So thank you so much to everyone for all of your support. Have a great day and I will see you next time. Goodbye.